This is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher, mother!
Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
So the problem with this podcast is that we don't open it like Thunderbirds.
No.
I kind of feel that we should have some sort of big rocketing. 5, 4, 3.
They did do that well.
They did. And it really sort of brings some energy to the podcast. And I'm not sure we've ever really achieved that for this
There's
podcast.
no energy in this early session. No, there's no.
Yeah.
I don't even know if we're recording yet.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's low energy screen watching is what the former US president referred to it as once.
Early spring.
Yeah.
Is spring sprung well for you?
Spring sprung. Look, I mean, there's a couple of things. So, physically, Simon, I've never been in greater shape. Like, just, day after day,
well.
it's just one.
You do look
No,
well.
it's
You're
terrible.
beaming.
I've, put on like 10 kilos this year. It's
it out.
ridiculous. But anyway, Simon, here's the dilemma I've got. Two things. One, do you see this right here? Little shaving neck the other day, splurting blood everywhere. It's been like 4 days now, hasn't healed. It's very frustrating. Other thing, Simon, and I'm concerned about this because of that neck. I got attacked by a bird today. I'm not sure if you can see the little band-aid there covering my ear.
Wow.
Here's the thing. If this little nick is lasting like 4 days and hasn't really quite gone down, what's going to happen with this geyser happening up here? Anyway, Simon, enough dilly-dallying. Let's get on with the podcast. We're here to talk about screen watching. We talk about the screens that have TV shows on them. We talk about the screens with the movies on them. We talk about the screens that you watch Jimmy Fallon on them. Folks, we talk about all the screens, all of your TV screen heroes discussed here on the podcast. And if we're going to segue away from TV screen heroes, what better opportunity to say, my name's Dan Barrett, joined by Simon Foster.
I am Simon Foster and you are Dan Barrett. It's very good to be. I'm sorry about the year. That's clearly the attack of the magpie, our early spring season here. Google it, kids, if you're from international audiences. Big week for shit sequels this week. The Nun 2 and My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3 have landed in cinemas. You'll notice on the running sheet that I'll not be reviewing either of those because they don't give a rats about them. Also, as we record this, the bad white dudes have been exposed. Danny Masterson off to jail for 30-odd years. Hang on to your That 70s Show's box sets because you won't be seeing that. Is that headed the way of the Cosby Show, you think? It just won't turn up on telly anymore?
I mean, the difference with the Cosby Show is that the Cosby Show was a series that was based very much on the moral teachings of Cliff Huxtable, a.k.a. One Bill Cosby. Names right there on the show. Like, it was just kind of gross trying to be told how to behave in the world and what you're doing wrong from a guy who was, well, doing that. So, hard to watch. The annoying thing, like, this is the problem with the Bill Cosby situation. Let me tell you what the problem was with the Bill Cosby situation. I was a third of the way through a Cosby Show rewatch when Hannibal Buress got on stage and started talking really publicly about Cosby. And within a week or two, I couldn't finish that rewatch. I'm the real victim in this, Simon.
Clearly, you are. You are indeed. As are many of the employee of Jimmy Fallon, who, as we record this, has been exposed in a Rolling Stone article for being, what's the industry word for it? A kind of a dick, really. Yeah, nasty times there, very toxic.
So, since that Rolling Stone article, he has since issued a statement, which is saying that, he's mortified that, people believe that he's acted that way, yada, yada. NBC's put out, like, the one person that was willing to actually come out and defend him. In the Rolling Stone article, they make a very specific point to say that they spoke to 50-odd staff members, and none of them were willing to go on a record as saying that they supported him.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. So it'll be interesting to see how the thing shakes out, because what's difficult about this week for Jimmy Fallon that wasn't difficult this time last week is that they've just launched a brand new podcast called Strike Force 5, which has all 5 of the late night talk show hosts. This is your Jimmy Fallon, your other Jimmy, the Kimmel. You've got your John Oliver, you've got your Seth Meyers, you've got your Stephen Colbert.
Sure.
All doing a podcast, all chucking jokes around with that, being
riffing on the
witty
current
and
affairs
and stuff.
of the day. Well, what do you do when one of them is you?
Well, what do you do when one of them is suddenly just, person non grata in the world? Like, surely they have to talk about it on this podcast.
Exactly, yeah.
But the bigger problem for them is that the reason this podcast exists, they're doing at least 12 episodes, 3 of them have been published. I think maybe 4. I'm not sure. There'll probably be a 4th one later today, I think, based on the schedule for last week.
Have you
I've
heard
listened
it
to
all?
the one so far. It's entertaining enough. But when you do listen to them, they talk about the fact that doing the podcast to try to raise money for their staff who've been unemployed. I don't know how much money you can make with a podcast, considering how many hundreds of people we're talking about here, but that's neither here nor there. I'm not sure you're doing much when you're paying them $50 each at most.
Well, I know what we get paid for this podcast, and that wouldn't keep a family of hamsters in grit for a week.
In fact, I tried, and I can't tell you about the results, Simon. It's too painful at this point.
I know.
Yeah. But the way the funding model of this is that I suspect that Spotify is putting a bit of cash in, but the 2 big corporate sponsors, there are 2 corporate sponsor brands, one being Mint Mobile and the other one being Aviation Gin, both of them companies that are owned in part by Ryan Reynolds. Okay, so that's kind of the fun sort of angle on it. But how do you do a podcast where one of your leads is now I think the word's embattled. You're an embattled person when you're in a situation like this.
He's been Ellened, I heard one person refer to it as. He's been caught out as being a nasty workplace person.
Yeah. Shout out to your wife, who I suspect is the one that said that.
Oh, did she? Oh, okay.
I suspect. I don't know. But anyway, Simon, how do you do a podcast when your embattled host, is currently embattled, and also your key sponsor is an alcohol brand, considering that the subtext of that Rolling Stone article was very much that Jimmy Fallon may have an alcohol problem, and that's largely what's fueling a lot of the tension on sets.
What a mess. What a terrible, terrible mess. What a horrible, horrible mess, which is kind of what you said about Babylon when it came out. You'll be happy to know that it's on Paramount Plus as of this week, which I think you should give it another go and give it a watch, because it's a hell of a film and will be one day considered a classic of its fairly niche genre, but still a genre nevertheless. What are you smirking at?
So I was trying to work out what that genre was, and then I realized I can't be, that cruel about it on the podcast. Look,
and by the time
I said what I had to say about it, Simon, and the thing is, what I had to say about it wasn't a unique sentiment around the place. There was a lot of people.
Not. I know. I rode that boat fairly alone. There was a couple of fairly prominent critics who sort of got on the Babylon bandwagon, and I was one of them. Well, prominence, that's a word that can be argued about. It's bandied around a lot. But, you're right. People can be, and I'm hoping it'll be reassessed. I think it'll be reassessed. By the time this podcast goes to air, not only will there be a sequel to Babylon, but it already would have been Star Trek Day, September 8th, the 57th anniversary of the original series premiering. And the aforementioned Paramount Plus has all your Star Trek series and movies there if you want to trek yourself into oblivion. Warp Factor 5.
Look, I think it's really exciting that there is a streaming service where you can find Star Trek movies. Simon, they're on all the platforms. They're not hard to find.
Well, that sets up my Star Trek weekend ahead of me. No, actually, I'm a bit sci-fi'd out at the moment after the festival. I'll probably just watch Babylon again. Or maybe I'll go and see Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Watch as I do and just put on the NCIS Sydney trailer and just put that on loop and watch it all weekend.
Are we all having a laugh at that? It looks okay.
Oh, look, it looks fine. What I would probably say is that, yes, it's very dopey that when you watch that trailer, you see the Sydney Opera House and the Harbour Bridge in countless shots.
And a kangaroo on the beach.
I missed the kangaroo on the beach somehow.
It's right in that montage. It's right there.
Maybe it is. Maybe I was just too excited by that point to notice what else is on screen. But Simon, yes, the Opera House and the bridge is there. And yes, that was a international trailer that probably needed to be recut for the Australian market to look less sort of grotesquely silly like that. But ultimately, that's probably just going to be the first episode. You'll see a lot of Australian stuff in it. After that, it will settle down a bit. So,
Harry's Cafe de Wheels.
I hope so. I mean, this is what I want. I actually want to see some of those Sydney landmarks, like the personality of Sydney come through. That isn't the bridge and the harbour.
Like the big burnt match near the art gallery there, that'd be a thing to see. Remember that?
Look, absolutely. But the other thing, Simon, is that you can actually justify showing so many shots of the Harbour Bridge and the Opera House purely because the naval base is literally right there. Like, they're not making that up. You go around the corner, you've got the naval base.
It is hard to sort of not have that in the background of your shot when it is the background of your shot.
So anyway, I'll be excited to take a look at it. I think it's a smart, savvy, clever idea to do an NCIS Sydney. Even though the idea of NCIS Sydney doesn't make a lot of sense, considering that it's about investigation of naval crimes, and we don't really have an NCIS here, so it has to be American NCISs.
Yeah. Good point. I never thought of that.
Yeah. But anyway, let's move on. What are we talking about, Simon?
What are we reviewing this week? I'm looking at 2 movies this week. Biosphere, starring Mark Duplass and Sterling K. Brown. What an unusual film this is. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Is this a remake of the Pauly Shore movie from the 90s?
Oh,
that was Biodome.
Biodome with our own Kylie Minogue was in it, wasn't she?
That is correct.
And Stephen Baldwin. I mean, I agree with his politics, but his movies are shit. And Theatre Camp is the other one that I'm watching, which I won't go on too gushingly about it till I get to the review, but I'm going to go gushingly about it. So what are you reviewing this week?
Oh, look, what am I not reviewing? I mean, it's just exciting title.
Most of the new television you're not reviewing.
What do you mean most of the new television I'm not reviewing?
No, true. You've stumbled across some new ones here. So let's have a look. What are you reviewing?
Well, this is what I do. I find things that need to be talked about. I talk about the new BBC... Well, it's not a new BBC show. It's been around for a couple of months, but it's debuting in Australia this week. It's called Black Ops. So I'm going to talk about that. You can find that streaming on Binge. Also, I'm going to talk about the 3rd season of The Morning Show. Apple TV Plus is The Morning Show. It returns mid-next week with a brand new season, brand new showrunner. Does that change the formula of the program? I mean, John Hamm's in it now, so think about that.
That's a bonus. Oh, yeah. He's your movie husband.
More than movie husband. Simon. Getting hot under the collar just thinking about Don Draper. So I'm going to talk about them. I'm also going to talk about a movie which was too much movie for Simon to talk about on a podcast. It's called Shin Ultraman. And so we're going to get to that.
Yeah. And you went out and saw it, did you?
I did.
Okay. All right.
I did. Went to a picture house and everything.
I saw it like 6 months ago, so I remember when it came around and made a big deal. It has been around for a long time, but I am keen to. I liked it a lot, so I'm keen to see what you think. Yep.
Simon, it hasn't been released. It's literally this week it came out.
This week it just popped down at Dendy exclusive cinemas. Good to know. We've got a fun intermission.
I was going to say, as always on the show, we do an intermission. I don't understand it, but Simon's going to explain it in a couple of minutes' time. We're also going to talk about what else we've been watching. We've got This Week in History. We've got a birthday quiz. Folks, there's a lot to get through. Let's take care of it after the reviews.
It stinks.
A couple of years ago, I found myself watching just a lot of British comedies. I'm going to say a few years ago, probably like 10 or 15 years ago. I was watching a lot of Peep Show back in the day. There was The Thick of It. There was this whole renaissance of British comedy. But it kind of feels like in the last couple of years, there haven't really been that many great British comedies out. So when some pals of mine over at the streaming service Binge are like, Dan, you got to check out Black Ops. It's pretty good. I thought, you know what? I'm going to give it a go, even though I'm not expecting much. And spoiler alert, it's pretty good.
Here's the thing. I need 2 officers to infiltrate a gang dealing drugs on Bright Marsh Estate.
I hate to break it to you, Clinton, but we ain't street.
We're just doing a spot of drug dealing. Yeah, I'm gathering that.
This sounds dangerous.
It is.
Get us out of this mess.
Start digging.
So Black Ops, and it's a bit of a pun title. So Black Ops, but it's about some black cops.
I see. Black
Cops. Yeah, you see what they're doing there?
Black Ops. That's good British comedy right there.
There we go. So this is about 2 people, Dom and Kay. They are working in and I forget what they actually refer to them, but they're kind of like community ambassadors for the police. So they have sort of
liaison officers sort of thing.
Yeah, like they've got uniforms, and I presume that this is a real thing they do in the UK. I'm not really too sure, but they've got things that are kind of like regular police uniforms, and they just walk around, they hand out information flyers and talk to people about police work and that sort of thing. But they're not real actual cops. And so that's kind of the sort of humorous conceit. And also the 2 of them are fairly sort of inept people who just couldn't really do that anyway.
Sounds familiar.
At least that's the way they're sort of framed at the beginning. So anyway, they're there as the couple of black people sort of working in the local police unit. And so they're constantly being sort of not really recognized by the other police that are working out of there. There's a great sequence in the first episode where they're like literally the 2 of them are on posters all over the building because, diversity representation matters. as far as marketing departments and the police are obviously concerned. So they've got the posters up of them all over the place about how, they're there to protect the community. Okay. Meanwhile, they're out of their uniform and they're just trying to get into like their workplace. And there's this cop stopping them from coming through. And they're like, we're literally here on the poster and not being let in. Very funny.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Okay. So anyway, the two of them are there and there's a cop there who is trying to run a drug busting ring. Oh, he's trying to bust a drug ring.
Oh, good.
He keeps on being provided cops to go undercover, except the drug ring are, African of descent, but the cops he keeps on being provided are middle-aged white people. And he can't, legitimately get them on the street and get them integrated into this gang. But then he comes across these two liaison officers and is like, you're my guys. I know you don't know what you're doing, but that's irrelevant. I'm going to get you out on the street, sort of, selling some drugs and get in with these guys. The only thing is, you have to go undercover. You have to pretend that you're cops who've been fired, and so we're going to get you properly fired. But don't worry, I'm going to look after you. And then when we bust the drug ring, I'll get you reinstated as actual cops. So they're like, yeah, this is an okay deal. So like they go and do some burnouts out the front in the cop car and get fired. And so they've got a believable story when the gang's asking them, hey, what's going on? And then when they look into them, they find, they're telling the truth about it all. Except at the very end of the first episode, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but if you've ever watched a cop drama before where someone's being put undercover and the one person who knows that you've gone undercover is, around the place, at the very end of the episode, one of the guys from the drug ring's like, hey, here's some shovels, dig a hole, I've got a body that you need to bury in here. Catch an Uber, we'll see you back in the city later. And obviously, you know who's going to be in that body bag. So now they're out on their own and they're involved in a Black Ops unit. Who knows what's going to happen? What hilarious shenanigans are going to take place?
In the right hands, this could be very, very funny. Who's the talent? Who are the two black cops?
Look, good question. I don't really know either of them, and I was hoping not to talk about talent because then it's going to show my struggle with trying to sort of give some names of.
Okay, doesn't matter. That's all right.
Look, I'm going to try to pronounce her name as Gemasola Emikulo.
Oh, nicely done. Wow, look at you.
Well, yeah, but there's a silent B. I don't know if I should be saying that B or not. That's the thing. Yeah, I think he keep the G silent, but not the B silent. I'm not sure. And then there's also Hamid Amashorn.
Here we go.
I think that might be right. Okay. The creator of it is a guy named Joe Tucker. Well, he's a co-creator alongside Lloyd Wolf.
Another easy name.
Yeah. They've done shows like For the Love of God and Witless. Two shows I don't know.
I know Witless, don't know For the Love of God. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, what I can say about the show is that both of the leads, very funny. I really like both of them. They deliver the comedy. They've got a great repartee between the two of them. The script's funny. Like there's actual good, proper jokes. And I'm going to put it out there. I laughed out loud.
You laughed out loud?
I laughed out loud. And to me...
You're not the laugh out loud type. You haven't done that since Police Academy 4.
You know me so well. Yeah, no, that was definitely the last one. Yeah.
Oh,
so anyway,
I'm checking it out. BBC
on the scale,
Yeah.
Like ultimately for this sort of thing, because it's a comedy, so like you can't really expect sort of a lot of weight to it. The things you need to measure it on are the following, which is, do you like the cast? Is it people that you necessarily want to keep coming back to? Is it actually funny? And really, once you tick those two boxes, like that's it. You watch that comedy, this does it. And so kudos.
I've just seen their pictures. They're quite large individuals, aren't they? There's a bit of physical comedy going on there, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Simon,
BBC. Big
it's
Black
fine.
Cops.
You can keep looking later, okay? And I don't think you want to say BBC in like that acronym. Like already I'm distancing myself from the activities of Simon Foster here with some of the comments he's made about the cast. Oh, these African people are a bit big, aren't they? BBC, what on earth is going on here? You were joking earlier talking about the Stephen Baldwin, but really, how close to the truth is that? I'm not the ones to say.
I'd become an American just to vote for him. All right, I'm going to move on to my review this week. The first one is called Biosphere.
Are you voting for Stephen Baldwin? What even for? Are you voting for him to be a Baldwin? Are they elected positions now? Let's play the clip.
The best.
None of this is logical. We know that things happen that we cannot explain.
Do you?
We want fast, we want slow, what are we feeling?
You pick.
So we walk into a not too distant future where there is only two men, as far as this movie is concerned, left on Earth. One is Mark Duplass, who we learn very early on was the President of the United States. Too young for the part, but he's quite good as this disheveled, buffoonish kind of character who really doesn't strike you as being any kind of leader at all, almost to the extent that he's been entirely responsible for the world all but obliterating itself. We meet his offsider, played by Sterling K. Brown, who along the way we understand to be his right-hand man, his friend since childhood, and someone whose intelligence has not only kept Duplass's presidential campaign and presidential life afloat below these many years, but he's also created a biodome. See how we came full circle there? They're living in this biosphere while the rest of the world has been annihilated, and they're keeping themselves alive and keeping themselves moving through this post-apocalyptic existence with some fish. And you'll be pleased to know that these fish are named after the characters in a certain bar set sitcom in Boston. And all the while, they're just trying to get on in their own buddy kind of way. What does happen is that when the female fish Diane dies, one of the two male fish left starts to go through a natural process of gender readjustment so that the fish can survive. They can then start having babies. What immediately becomes apparent is that the Mark Duplass character, being one of only two men left in the world, he starts to go through some gender reassessment of his own. His testicles start to disappear up inside himself and he begins to grow breasts, to put it bluntly. You can edit that part out if you want, Dan, for sensitivity reasons. So what you find is this...
Sorry, how do I edit that out? You gave me no break. I guess we're keeping it in.
We're keeping it in. So what you have here is this very, very unusual film that starts off playing like a real bro comedy where they're just sort of getting along, playing video games, eating the small bits of food that they have in this biosphere environment, until one of them starts to offer up an alternative for the future of mankind by getting his period and developing his womb. And the film just goes along at this very unusual pace, telling this very bizarre, totally original story, all the while sort of working in gender politics and, I guess, sort of gender expectations and social roles and all these different elements that come into play when this sort of situation, this totally fantastic but entirely strangely believable situation starts to play out. The two actors are great together. Duplass had a hand in the script with Mel Eslin, a young female director who is making her debut with this film. They go a bit high and mighty towards the end, and I couldn't quite gather what the point of the final few minutes were. It tries to go sort of super indie and super clever with the play out of how it all sort of the denouement, as they say. But boy, I got to say, I was hooked right from the start. I'd never seen a film like this. I laughed a lot. I shrugged my shoulders a lot. There's a few moments where I just went, "Oh boy, I can't believe they're doing that." But you'll never see another film like Biosphere, so I'm glad it's out there in the world, in limited release as we speak.
Okay, it's not on a streaming platform anywhere?
No, not locally. It's just doing the rounds in the cinemas. But I like Duplass a lot. He's kind of always in on the joke to me. Like his performances can be a little bit smarmy or a little bit too smug, and he doesn't always endear himself in that way. But in this one, he's really, really terrific and has to do some pretty brave things with his co-star, Sterling K. Brown, who's also terrific. So they're the only two in the whole film, apart from the fish. Unfortunately, Diane leaves us early on, as I mentioned, but there's still Sam and Woody, and Woody starts to change sex, just like in the that final season of Cheers, which really went off the rails. So, check out Biosphere. It's very good.
Well, Diane should leave early because she did in Cheers.
Exactly. Steeped in reality.
I should point out Mark Duplass is 47 years old, which is notable, as you said, that he was too young to be president, and he could be president legally for 12 years at his age. Just saying.
Okay, that's good to know. Should have done my research.
Should have. Didn't. Simon, if you'd done the research, you'd also know how to give me a really good segue and say, speaking of Mark Duplass, I believe he's a cast member in Apple TV Plus's The Morning Show.
I'm all over this network. I need to have a say in the future of this place.
What you are asking is unprecedented.
I am unprecedented.
You want that seat at the grown-up table. But it's not your turn, Alex.
Don't forget to shut the door on your way out. Boop. 3, 2, 1.
We're off the air. What's happening?
Someone's in the system.
Get that music turned off!
To say, Simon, that I was looking forward to season 3 of The Morning Show on Apple TV Plus is a understatement. This is a program that I found to be hugely frustrating, deeply annoying, just terrible, terrible TV for the first 2 seasons. But it is produced with so much gloss. It is a subject matter that, it's based around the production of a US TV morning program, like a, Today style program. Something I'm deeply fascinated by. It's got a really compelling cast of main leads with Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon in the leads.
Good cast, yeah.
Good supporting cast with people like the aforementioned Mark Duplass in there, with Celine Song, as discussed last week in the new hit indie movie that I can't think of the name of right now.
Past Lives, and the actress is Greta Lee.
Sorry, Greta Lee. Celine Song was the filmmaker. Sorry, yep. Greta Lee's the actress. Good supporting cast, good primary cast, strong concept behind it. The problem is that the writing has just never really quite lived up to the potential of it. Lots of people are willing to give it a pass, and I've never understood that because the show is awful. I've watched every episode.
Wow.
Cut to season 3. Apple TV made the wise decision to jettison the former showrunner, and so I'm thinking if the person writing the scripts has changed, which was the big problem with the program, it's got possibly like a really good way to invest some time. And then I started hearing John Hamm has joined the show. Juliana Margulies is in there in a much bigger supporting role than in the second season of the program. Love Margulies. She was there for me in ER. She was there for me as a good wife. That's 20 plus years worth of television greatness there.
Margulies mania.
Yeah. Nobody's a bigger fan of Canterbury's Law than I. So look, sat down, ready to watch here, the season 3 of The Morning Show, and I'm happy to report that it is 5% better than it used to be.
That's good.
But the problem was it was 170% fucking terrible. And so we're now here in a bit of a dilemma, Simon.
So what is the deal here? Why get rid of the old showrunner and just bring in a new runner who doesn't seem to know how to spice things up or make things any better? Who is the new showrunner? What's his or her pedigree? And how is this just a format that doesn't lend itself? Well, I guess after 3 seasons, it must be doing something, right? People must be watching, but it doesn't necessarily make it good.
The problem, so there's a couple of problems with the show. First of all, and it's really apparent under the new regime of the program, but it's it's a lot more soapy than it used to be. So that's a problem. It just kind of feels like a high-end glossy soap in terms of some of the relationship drama. So you've got that as a concern.
Not a bad thing in itself, though.
Not a bad thing in itself, but when it's... there's good ways to do it and bad ways, and this just doesn't really justify it. It's not really engaging soap. It's just kind of going through the motions a bit. So you've got that. But the biggest problem with it is that the very foundation of the program was based on the idea that on this morning TV program, which is called The Morning Show, on this program, you've got a toxic TV host played by Steve Carell, who's apparently been involved with some behind-the-scenes touchiness. And so he's been ostracized, was at the height of Me Too, and so the character's gone. Okay, so you've got that, but by doing that, and then also there was a couple of episodes in that first season which were set around some Los Angeles wildfires that really happened in real life, they decided to root the show heavily in real-world events and sort of give their depiction of it. not entirely dissimilar to Aaron Sorkin's The Newsroom, but with less sort of a journalistic intent behind it. So you've got that as an issue, but by sticking to like these constant real world events and trying to root itself in the zeitgeistiness of it all, it doesn't really feel like the show is able to take any sort of bold chances. And when there is an episode in this season, which I can't give away because there's an embargo on that episode, I will say at one point, Reese Witherspoon finds herself in a very real world situation. And by placing her there, it is thoroughly ridiculous. And what happens during that situation is comically just terrible. It just makes the show just unwatchable. Like, it's hard to say what this is. Okay,
I'm going to
without
spoil
giving
it.
away the thing. I'm not going to spoil. I'll tell you afterwards.
I'm going to spoil it. She was carrying one of the gas lamps in the Charlottesville March, from what I understand. That was her role. That was they think they can make comedy out of all of this.
No, that is not what it is. But also, you're not tremendously far off.
Oh, really? Because I was just making a gag. I was just gagging.
Yeah, no, that is not the case. But you're also like, you're in a ballpark. I'll put it that far. Yeah, but anyway, it's ridiculous. It's silly TV, and it's just such a shame to see some really great actors roped into what's going on here. It's a great payday. I can say that much.
And they are some great actors. I mean, you said Carell turns up again?
Well, he was there in the first season. Obviously, you don't watch the program because he did go careening off a cliff in the second season, so you're probably not going to get him back in the third.
Wow, okay. All right. No, I haven't watched it, and I know it's been a hit for the streamer, and there's a lot of quality people in there. But
if you want some quality names, here's some names for you. Billy Crudup is a regular actor in this and has been from the first season. You got some
new guy from Watchmen.
Yep, you got Watchmen. Jeez. I'll talk about him more being Russell from Almost Famous, but that's just me. Yeah. Stephen Fry makes a bit of an appearance in there. Holland Taylor. There's a whole bunch of familiar big name faces. You know, there's a lot going for it. The problem is, as terrible as this is, it's still pretty watchable.
Yeah.
I've watched every episode. I can't stop watching it. But it's not good. And if anybody can actually tell me with great authority what's going on in the opening titles of this program, please tell me how it relates to the show at all. Because it honestly looks to me like they just went to a stock video site and found a file which was premium TV opening title credits and purchased it for $29.95 using
that's a good price for opening
using Tim Apple's credit card. Charge it to the company, okay, and then just slapped it on the front of the thing, because there is nothing about those opening titles that explicitly speak to the morning show, or as it's called here in Australia, Morning Wars.
Morning Wars. It's been quite the year for terrible television that is eminently watchable. This house became quite. We set our calendars by every weekly episode of And Just Like That, the Sex and the City sequel. It's excruciatingly bad television. It's car crash TV in every regard. But I did not look away. I watched it and tutted at how awful it was and how far from the original Sex and the City it had fallen, and yet compelling TV.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, are we done with morning war shows? Show wars? The shows, morning wars?
Done with it the morning show. As far as this conversation's done, yeah, I'm done with it, but I'm back for season 4. I'll be back there for season 5. I fucking hate it. I think it's terrible, but I'm there for it.
How many hours of your life have you wasted on this show?
Oh, well, as many episodes there have been now. So, I've seen all of season 3, which debuts next week on Apple TV Plus. So I guess about 30 episodes. They're about 55 minutes each.
Well, I totally enriched my life with
Simon. Simon. I don't think I'm under embargo for this, so I'm just going to share it.
Yeah.
When you're watching the season return, I think it comes back with a couple of episodes. I think I'm safe saying that. You will see a sequence with Reese Witherspoon, John Hamm, and Billy Crudup floating around in space. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Fast and the Furious. Oh, that's hilarious.
Anyway, sorry. Continue on with your little review.
All right. I enriched my life with a quick 92-minute investment in a little film called Theatre Camp.
Welcome, auditioners. You guys are so talented, so unbelievable. This will break you. This will fully destroy you.
Congratulations on being the most talented kids at camp.
Starfish, jiggle like a jackal, jiggle like a jackal.
These are the things we can do with masks.
These people are really weird.
Now, I knew of theatre camps. It's kind of like a summer camp for talented kids, and they get to put on a show, and they go off into the woods where there's cabins, and they make a lovely story. But apparently it's a very big deal in the US, certainly on the East Coast, the Broadway coast, as it were. And in this new film, Theatre Camp, which is shot in sort of a mockumentary style, we learn of this group of kids who are on board for what may be the last ever summer that this traditional theatre camp is open. There's a bit of a meatballs effect going on in that just up the road from this camp, the rich kids are there and they want to take over the sweetly run, very low-key theatre camp in which we find ourselves. Things are conspiring against the theatre camp. The woman who founded it and makes it a success, the wonderful Joan Rubinski, played by Amy Sedaris, very briefly, is she goes into a coma, and we learn at the start of the film that in a storyboarded sequence that one day into the filming of this documentary, our subject fell into a coma, so we had to readjust our filming schedule. And what you find is that her son now takes over theatre camp, the sort of dudeish Troy, played by Jimmy Tatro, and he's got to try and make it with the cool kids and get all the teachers on board to try to save the theatre camp before it goes under. So it's a very sort of sweet, kids put on a show type of storyline, all shot in a mockumentary style of way. There are some kind of way out there comedy moments that get a little bit spinal tappy, but the story itself and the characters that are all part of this kind of remain really rooted in reality. Ben Platt, who has bounced back from the disaster that was Dear Evan Hansen, he plays Amos Klobuchar, who's the acting coach at the school. Molly Gordon, who we adore from Shiver Baby and a bunch of other things. She plays Rebecca Diane, no surname, hyphenated. She does the dance moves. Noah Galvin absolutely steals this show as Glenn. I'm not going to give away the ending and the role he plays in making the show a success, but he is the absolute scene stealer. And Ayo Edebiri, who, where did we last see her? She was in
Simon.
I think she's come
Simon,
Spider-Man.
seriously.
She was one of the Spider-Mans, wasn't she?
Dude, we talked about this last week, and we're going to talk about this again, about how the fact that you haven't watched The Bear is betraying so many aspects of this podcast at this point.
The other one. All right. Okay, I promise I'll get on that. I know people keep talking to me about the Bear, and people I respect too. So, and you. So I should get on it. So Ayo Edebiri in this one, and she's very funny as sort of a ring-in who just wants to get the job and tarts up her resume just to get the job as the teacher and doesn't know anything about acting. It's very funny. And I must admit, I laughed and I cried at the end show when they put on. Unlike you, I have a soul and a heart, and I love a good musical. And this one plays completely into that love of live theatre and live musicals. So get along to this. Do yourself a favour, as they say. You'll love the singing and the dancing, and all the kids are involved. Are just wonderful. So it's called Theatre Camp. Probably zipping through cinemas. I don't think it's going to be around for too long, but it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, so I had Ayo Edebiri as my talent to look at person on my list last week.
Oh,
as we
last
were
week's
talking.
Intermission. Oh,
Yeah.
Of course you did.
So yeah, I was talking about her in that. She's the breakout of The Bear. But
Yes.
in season 2 of The Bear, there is a recurring character who is incredibly prominent throughout the second season, plays a pivotal role, who is played by Molly Gordon. Okay, so the character in The Bear is, I think her name's Claire. I'm pretty sure that's right. She's the, former potential sort of love interest that becomes the proper love interest as the second season of the show carries on. Simon, you got to watch The Bear. Like, really.
I'm going to watch The Bear. I would have had a lot more to say about this if I'd watched The Bear. Molly Gordon directs this with Nick Lieberman. She's a talent to watch. Both Nick and Molly made a short film of this a few years ago, and it's been expanded out into this feature. So they know this sort of space they're in. They know what they're doing, and they know all the little quirks and funny bits of real-life theatre camping that they can turn into a really terrific, absolute crowd pleaser of a movie.
That's it. And the 4 main actors in this are also the writers on top of that as well. So some directed as well, but Molly Gordon, Noah Galvin, Nick Lieberman, and Ben Platt all co-wrote the film as well.
Yep. Yeah, it's a small production. You can tell it's a small production, and a lot, like I say, a lot of it shot handheld, a lot of it shot like a documentary, but that does not diminish the comedy and the sweetness involved with this. It's an absolute hoot.
And anyone who likes to spend their time on the internet looking into Nepo babies probably will have a field day with this production. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let us move on to the 5th and final thing we're talking about here in the review section. We're talking about the brand new Japanese movie. It's called Shin Ultraman. My interest in this one was incredibly high. So back in, I'm going to say, the glory year of 2016, thereabouts.
When you peaked.
I mean, I peaked about 3 years before then, but I was just holding on to glory at that point. This guy named Hideaki Anno had directed a movie called Shin Godzilla. Now, he was best known for Neon Evangelion Genesis. Is that the name of that cartoon?
Neon Genesis Evangelion. Yep, other way around.
Yeah, that's about right. But anyway, he decided he was going to go off and do some live-action feature filmmaking and made this film called Shin Godzilla. My understanding, without speaking Japanese, is that Shin is a word which kind of translates to one or the first. Thereabouts. It kind of plays that way. And so Shin Godzilla, and I didn't realize this when I sat my bottom down as the cinema, was the origin story of Godzilla being told on a big screen. So it was kind of a retelling of Godzilla's first efforts to get onto the mainland and Tokyo and, cause some havoc in the way that he does.
And we know what happened there.
If you watch that film, and I've seen it a couple of times, I was really quite fond of it. The entire movie is not so much about Godzilla as much as it's about the bureaucracy of Japan. It's supposed to be a satirical take on the way the government mishandled the Fukushima earthquake, nuclear incident from, was it 2010? Thereabouts?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, thereabouts. Yeah. Should have looked into that. Okay, but it was a satirical take on that. And the film does a great job of showing how the bureaucrats get in the way of actually combating a major catastrophe as it's taking place because they've got so much process and back and forth that they go through in order to do it. So if something as ridiculous as a Godzilla monster attack takes place, then they're ill-equipped to handle it. That's what that film's about. It's hilarious. Because it's about bureaucracy, it's kind of shot a little bit like a Wes Anderson movie, and that is lots of static shots and people standing around. I had a blast. So, with that in mind, I was excited to see Shin Ultraman, okay, which is the same director who's thinking, hey, look, we've done the Godzilla. We're going to start tackling other Japanese pop cultural icons. Let's do Ultraman. So, it can conceivably be seen as a direct sequel to Shin Godzilla. Okay, so you can watch it through that lens.
The title. Yep.
Kind of. As the film opens, it's very much sort of taking the idea that after the Godzilla attack on Tokyo, there's been a number of kaiju that have cropped up, and so there is a government agency that's been set up to handle these kaiju. If you've ever watched
Explain for the audience what a kaiju is.
Big monster.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for the audience, I mean me. But yes, big monster.
Did you not see the movie Pacific Rim? I saw that kaiju for a few years there.
I know.
I don't think you do.
I stumbled onto the set of Pacific Rim the sequel to it, when they were filming down in the Shire. I was down there at a meeting, and
were you buying drugs?
I wasn't buying drugs. No.
Meeting.
No. Yes. Okay. Do go on. Shin Ultraman.
Yeah, where are we at? So yeah, if people have ever watched like early Ultraman or I don't know Ultraman that well. I can talk about my relationship with Ultraman, which is a bit unique shortly.
Keep it clean.
It's clean enough. I was a young child.
See, I don't know much about Ultraman. I went into this, I saw this movie, and I got a little bit confused and a little bit bored, but there were some big moments in it that were very spectacular, which I appreciated. But I didn't enjoy this anywhere near as much as Shin Godzilla.
Well, I mean, this is kind of thing. So Ultraman has been a frequent cultural character through Japanese television history. Like, there have been plenty of Ultraman shows. In fact, every couple of years they tend to revamp it. I'm trying to find the name of the thing. So there is a TV show that I've actually seen a fair bit of.
Googling while you're podcasting.
I'm trying to find the name of it. I just can't work it out. But anyway, there's a thing. I want to call it like Ultra Force 7, but that's not quite right. Okay, but there's a TV show that this seems to, from my limited understanding of Ultraman, so, take that with a grain of salt. But it seems to be that this show is taking a lot of inspiration from this one show. Ultra 7, I think is the name. And it was about a group of government agents who one of their team members is partnered with Ultraman. So when Ultraman lands on Earth, he ends up spiritually linking with a human on the planet so he can understand about humanity, which is what we find in this movie. It's very much about that, and it's about a team member from this government group going out. In the same way that Shin Godzilla is about government bureaucracy getting in the way of that, it seems like this film, and I'm not Japanese, as you may be aware, so I may have missed out on some of the cultural subtleties at play here. But it sort of seemed to me that the very obvious text of the movie is about how generally Japan's left to sort of fend for itself, except when there's something that the rest of the world wants from it. So in this instance, when Japan's left to deal with kaiju, nobody really cares. But as soon as a alien in the form of Ultraman lands in Japan and wants to do stuff with them, suddenly the US is offering its assistance and getting in there. So it seems to me that that's the interest of the movie. The problem is the movie doesn't really play around with that anywhere near the depth that it probably needs to. And so it's given some lip service about that in the first 20 minutes. And the first 20 to 30 minutes of this film are hugely entertaining. The problem with this movie is that it keeps on pivoting as to what the show is about. It's almost like there's 5 episodes of a TV show that they've just stitched together. And I just couldn't find any sort of consistent through line in terms of what's the narrative about, what is the thematic core as to what's going on, why is this so ridiculous in terms of the various things that are set up, why has the second alien that lands on a planet just suddenly turned up in the government offices of the one team that are connected to Ultraman without knowing that one of their members is Ultraman? Like, I don't understand a whole bunch of the plot points that take place, and the film is not interested in exploring any of the actual connective tissue. It just wants to give you a whole bunch of silly activities to while your mind away with, and I was thoroughly bored for at least 2/3 of this movie, Simon.
Good. Then I don't feel so bad, because this came with a lot of festival buzz about it. I did go after it for my festival. When I sat down and watched it, I thought, no. I mean, it does have some pretty cool sort of men in plastic suits against the backdrop of a little city type of action that you expect from the Japanese kaiju sort of genre. And that was fun to watch, but I did not get into the story of Shin Ultraman at all. So just hitting Dendy Cinemas, I do believe, is your note here.
Yeah, so it's exclusive to Dendy Cinemas. And I think it's a misnomer to say the story of Shin Ultraman, as it's really stories of Shin Ultraman.
You make a valid point. All right, that brings to the end our review segment. I'm looking forward to this intermission. This has got a lot of fun going forward. We're going to have to speed up the second half of this show down because I've got real media commitments to get to after this. But the intermission.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's intermission time.
I'm very happy to speed through this intermission, Simon, because I don't understand it. What are we doing?
What's so hard to understand? All right, so what I thought was, I've called this intermission Talk to Me, a reference to the current horror film that's doing the rounds, but the dream interview. So living or dead in any language from any industry sector, if you could choose, let's say 3 people in the history of cinema or television, who would be the interview subject that you'd like to sit down with and talk screen watching and just talk to movies and just interview? And the example I put here is I'd interview Martin Sheen in 1978 on the set of Apocalypse Now. Imagine what we know about that production. Imagine the sort of interview we'd get. So I've come up with 3. You're rushing to come up with 3. I'll start off with my first one, and we'll see what you think. So, from what we understand, the Beetlejuice set was kind of a crazy time. Baldwin didn't want to be there. Winona Ryder was having a tough time. Michael Keaton was going crazy. So I would sit down with Tim Burton and the cast of Beetlejuice, do an on-set interview at Culver Studios in Culver City, California in April 1987. That's less than a month before principal photography finished. And I would get them at the peak of both their creativity and their anxiety. And I think that would be a terrific, terrific interview. Do you see what I'm doing here? That would be a fun interview.
I mean, I kind of get that now that you have explained it, but I will say that in the notes that were provided to me, it was less clear. I'm like, it talks to anyone from any sector across space-time.
It was very clear.
But why
anyway you like. Would you go back and interview the Lumiere brothers when they'd stick a sheet up on the wall and invent cinema? That would be an interesting interview. Yeah, but what we know, that would be interesting. Give me your first one.
Okay, I've got two people.
Okay.
The very first one, I would like to speak to Rod Serling. In the mid 1960s, so probably let's say 65, and that way I could just have a good chinwag with him about the Twilight Zone, because who doesn't want to talk about the Twilight Zone? But also he wrote the screenplay for the Planet of the Apes, and so I'd be curious to talk to him about that.
That's perfect. See, you nailed it. That is a great one. That is a great example of who you'd like to talk to, knowing what you know about the Twilight Zone. Go back in time and talk to Rod Serling. That's brilliant.
But you've got here in any language or industry sectors,
you could. Well, that's just opening it up. You may want to go back and talk to Gerard Depardieu and warn him about.
It wasn't clear that we were talking about
on airlines.
It wasn't clear that we were talking about the screen industry. You just said industry sector. Am I talking to plumbers about screen stuff? Oh
my God. All right. My second one, John Hughes and the cast of The Breakfast Club on-set interview at Maine North High School in Des Plaines, Iowa, May 1984. They're a few weeks away from finishing the shoot. It has been an emotional time on set. They don't know what they're in for. The studio has been bickering with Hughes, and it's been a tough shoot. I would like to get Hughes and his 5 key cast members of The Breakfast Club and sit them down and have a chat. It's not the biggest moment in cinema, but if it's my dream interview, that's what I'd like to do.
Okay, so I've only got one other thing.
Okay,
and just to clarify, I can talk to anybody.
Anybody in any sector. At anyone from this film, just your favourite. Who would you want to chat to most from the film or TV sector?
I'm going to travel back to 1996. I'm going to talk to Dan Barrett about what he's watching on television.
Beautiful. What would you say to him? What would you ask him?
I would just have a bit of a chinwag about ER and homicide life in the streets and Murder One, what he thinks about that current era of the X-Files. Let him down to know the show's not going to be very good in a couple of seasons' time. What's going on with Seinfeld? Don't get too excited about that final episode. Just general stuff that he probably needs to know.
Yeah, that's important.
I mean,
to stop doing that with the Pamela Anderson poster. That's not what they're made for.
Why would I tell him that?
Okay, and my final one, I'd talk to the two Kevins, Kevin Costner and Kevin Reynolds. I'd have an on-set interview on the set of Waterworld on the shores of the Waipio Valley on the Big Island in Hawaii. That would be June 1994. They would both be at each other's throats, but they can't get out of this interview that they've promised me. I am travelling back in time after all. So I'd talk to them about what a crazy time Waterworld has been, and maybe even let slip what they're in for when word starts to get out.
The two Kevins. This is Bacon Erasure.
What's the second one? Bacon Erasure. Yes, no. Costner and Reynolds, who were good friends and had made a lot of films together, but fell out badly until the Hatfield and the McCoys came around later on. Anyway, that was Intermission, which probably went about as long as it needed to. Okay, what's next?
Some would say too long. Let's move on to what else have you been watching?
Oh, this is a good one. You lead off with this one.
Okay, so the difficulty that I have with this program is that... one of the difficulties that I have with this program is that while Simon can go, yeah, I'm going to talk about this movie, and he just kind of continues on,
Yeah.
I do TV programs, which means that these shows just keep on going. So Simon will just start going, why haven't you watched new things this week? What's going on? I'm like, well, I've also got 35 programs I'm invested in because I've watched the first episodes and I'm continuing them through because that's what TV watching is all about. So, cut to me in this segment. I think it's important to go back and give a very quick sort of revisit on some titles that I've watched recently and mentioned on this here podcast.
Valid
Minx,
point, sure.
Season 2, Episode 8 of the second season drops in the next couple of hours. I haven't seen that yet, but it is the season finale. And I have to say, I really love first season Minx. And second season, I probably don't love quite in the same way, but I respect it a lot. It's gone to some very sort of complicated areas, and that's probably another great way to sort of segue into what I wanted to discuss here, which is that if you watched episode 7 of it, most of it's taking place in a gay bathhouse. And I've never seen that on television before, certainly in the graphic depictions that are seen throughout that episode. Anyway, it's just interesting to me that it is finding some very specific experiences that one has in terms of discovering their sexuality and the way that that really speaks to the mission statement of the program as established through a premise about making a women's magazine about feminism, even though most of the pictorials in it are of naked dudes and most of the readership for that magazine are gay men. And I find the show does a really interesting job of exploring some LGBT issues through the context of what is some very sort of standard heterosexual politics of the era.
Interesting. All right. What else?
Also, I've been blitzing through Run the World. This was another half-hour comedy. It's kind of like the Black Sex and the City, if you want to think about it that way. First season, I thought was just incredible. The first season, the breakout star was an actress who I haven't got in front of me. I want to say her name was Andrea Bordeaux. She had it was a breakout role. She hasn't done anything since. She ended up leaving the show because when COVID hit, she wasn't prepared to abide by the COVID protocols. And as a result, was not invited to continue on with the program. So I went from being a group of 4 to a group of 3. The problem was she was the only one that was really worth following from that group of 4 characters in the first season. And so it's definitely felt lacking in the second season. And throughout it, they do nothing to plug that hole. And it's very disappointing to see the show go the way that it has.
And you have a very brief mention of the big Star Wars property at the moment, which is getting some very mixed buzz. I can't quite get a handle on what the internet thinks of this. Some are saying it's the best thing ever, others not so much. Where does Dan Barrett sit on the latest episode of Ahsoka?
Look, not the best thing ever. I much prefer to Andor with its more grounded approach to Star Wars, and I just think the storytelling was just more interesting. But I'm having a great time with this. I think it's grand.
Good to know. That is a brief mention. All right. Yes, I'm enjoying it as well. I want to mention very quickly a show that's on SBS On Demand. I've been stumbling in and out of this one. My aforementioned wife loves Blue Lights, and I came home last night just as episode 6 of a 7-episode season kicked off, and I settled in for one of the most tense and exciting hours on television. This is a British show all set in Belfast, where a mixture of Irish and British cops sort of take on the local hoods. One of them played by an absolutely frightening John Lynch, who's a monster of a man. It has some terrific young actors. It has some very expertly shot action sequences, and has a selection of plots and subplots which seem both entirely believable and very much of the police procedural drama template. I just didn't know anything about this. We haven't covered it on the show here, and I just stumbled across it, and I want to give it a plug because this certainly the 6th episode of the 7-episode season was an absolute cracker. So it's called Blue Lights, and it's on SBS On Demand.
Simon, you know how I feel about the Irish.
Yes, I do. All right, this day in history. Do we have a sting for this part? I never get this far in the podcast.
Simon, this is the greatest thing that we run in the entire podcast. It's a clip from the Time Tunnel.
Oh, wow, that's exciting. I will listen to it now I know that. Okay, play the clip. All right, Dan Barrett, answer me these questions. In history, September 9, 2001, produced by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, which miniseries, at its time the most expensive ever made, debuts on US TV?
Barely even a question that needs considering. It is, of course, Band of Brothers.
Well done, sir. September 10 of which year? There's a bit of a trick with this question. You've got to name the year. Did the 52nd Emmy Awards take place? The big winners were The West Wing, Will and Grace, James Gandolfini, and the beautiful Celia Ward.
So, I can't say with 100% certainty, but there is like some very logical ruling out of years that you can do with this one. So, for most of The Sopranos run, as well as The West Wing, nominated and winning quite a number of awards were two people in this very category. So, Alison Janney won a whole bunch of awards for The West Wing. And then as that started losing a little bit of critical favour, we started seeing Edie Falco from The Sopranos really picking up like a whole bunch of awards. And for a few years, they sort of alternated a little bit. So we can probably rule out most of their runs as being sort of awarded as those two. So you can rule out those years. The key one is obviously Cell Award, and that show will be that one called, I think it's Once and Again, which was running concurrently with another show on at the same time called Time and Again. So I always confuse the two, but I'm pretty sure this one was Once and Again. And that one ran for a few years in the late 90s with some overlap into that West Wing Sopranos era, as I recall. So I would presume that it is the Emmy Awards for the first year that The Sopranos and The West Wing, which both began in 1999. Sorry, West Wing began in 1999 in September. Sopranos began in January of 2000. Okay, so both of those seasons will be Emmy eligible. So I reckon for the first Emmy Awards after both of those debuted, which is the 2000 Emmy Awards, that's the year.
Well done, sir. You created a visual Venn diagram, and we appreciate that. It was September 10, 2000. The 52nd Emmy Awards took place. September 15, 2019, just recently, not that recently, I guess, who becomes the oldest person to win an Emmy Award?
This one I'm not sure. Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out if there's some logic that sort of underpins this one or not.
Well, he's a giant of television, was at the forefront for decades.
Oh, wait, stop. Okay. Done it. Okay, so it's 2019. So just pre-COVID. It'll be Norman Lear, and he would have won for filmed in front of a live audience, where they reproduced the two sitcoms that he did, and the first year was All in the Family and The Jeffersons back to back.
God damn it, Dan Barrett, you're a genius. You're an absolute genius. That's exactly right. He was 97, and he did win for live in front of a studio audience, All in the Family, from ABC Network. Okay, I know we have a clip for
he's not dead yet.
No,
like
still doing very well.
And he's still vibrant. Like, you hear him on interviews, and he's totally with it. It's
totally with it. All right, time for the birthday quiz, my friend.
No, not happy birthday. No, not that. Please, no, not happy birthday.
This one's a tough one. I don't think you're going to get this, and I think you're going to have a spit because I included Louis C.K., but let's see. September 11, 1961, Virginia Madsen was born. From Electric Dreams, our favourite movie. September 12, 1957, the beautiful Rachel Ward was born. September 12, 1977, the aforementioned Louis C.K., public masturbator. And September 12,
1977?
Hey?
You said born in 77. That can't be right.
No, I didn't. 1967, I said. September 12, 1967.
Oh, there was a sevens there.
Born.
Go on.
September 12, 1973, the late great Paul Walker, God rest his soul, was born. So what could Virginia Madsen, Rachel Ward, Louis C.K. and Paul Walker possibly have in common?
I mean, I presume that they've all been spending time in wine country with Paul Giamatti.
What? No, it's a reference to, what was that movie called? Sideways with Virginia Madsen? No.
No? Okay.
Now, there's a bit of a clue in the visual image, which you can see on our Facebook page. I put it up there every week for the birthday quizzes.
Okay, they're all black and white pictures, but I don't know what that would... I mean, so I saw the image that you put out, and I thought Louis C.K. had appeared opposite David Lynch in an episode of Louis, or a couple of episodes. I think it was a 3-part
plot. Not what I'm thinking of.
I'm not too sure.
September 11, 1961, Virginia Madsen. She starred in the age drama 1985, which was shot in very evocative monochrome. September 12, 1957, Rachel Ward. She co-starred with Steve Martin in his black and white comedy Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. September 12, 1967, Louis C.K. shot his unreleased film I Love You, Daddy in black and white.
Also, there were a number of episodes of the show that were also in black and white.
That's right, there was, yep. And September 12, 1973, Paul Walker featured in mostly black and white scenes in Pleasantville. So you were kind of on track there. They'd all starred in black and white or monochrome movies.
I don't really know I was on track. I mentioned David Lynch. That was...
You mentioned black and white. You did all right. I'm cutting you some slack. You're putting in the effort this week, and we all appreciate it.
Oh, sorry, I was supposed to do something now. Simon, let's wrap this up and get out of here.
Let's do that.
You have been listening to the Screen Watching podcast. Thank you for enduring this far in. Clearly, Simon doesn't.
Occasionally, I do.
You can find me at the Always Be Watching newsletter. It's at alwaysbewatching.com. On that newsletter, I talk about the big stories in TV streaming and occasionally film, but mostly like streaming movies. You know, the sort of movies that actual people watch and not the... What did Simon even talk about this week? Who even knows? You can find that. I also do on Fridays a Always Be Streaming newsletter, which just recounts the shows and movies that launch that very week on the streaming platforms. This week you can hear me on the Radio National podcast. It's called Stop Everything. And I talk about the streaming TV industry there for like about, I don't know, we recorded for about 5 hours, but I think it's about 40 minutes of the podcast.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so if you want to hear some
40
wisdom...
seconds into that. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, if you want to hear me talk to podcasters who actually know what they're doing behind a microphone, okay, you might want to check out that one.
How do you like my mic technique? Mic technique. Okay, Screen Watching, at Screen Watching Podcast on Facebook, over on the X. You can at @screen_watching on YouTube. We're at Screen Watching. Why did we not get just one word for all the different socials? Was I in charge of that? I think I might have been. And you can email us at screenwatchingpodcast@gmail.com. Don't make that face at me. Send us your news, reviews, ideas for a shorter show. And you can see all my writings over on screen-space.net.
I've got ideas for a shorter show.
Me too. Thank you, Dan. Good show this week, my friend.
Okay, I think one of us will be back next week with the new format.
Yeah. You got a new format, have you?
Yeah, one of us will be back.
Well, it'll be an hour-long show and you'll just talk non-stop for the first half hour and I'll talk non-stop for the second half hour. That'd work.
No,
That's solid podcasting.
I was thinking about something similar, but it'll only run for 30 minutes.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for being part of this week's Screen Watching.
We'll be back next week.